Have you ever caught your reflection in the mirror, not after a joyful moment or a casual glance, but after a silent, private breakdown? There's something haunting about that kind of stillness. The room is quiet, your breathing shallow, your face puffy, blotched with red, and your eyes glassy, unfocused. But it's not the physical exhaustion that grips you the most. It's something else. Something deeper, more disorienting. It's as if you're staring at a stranger. Not the woman you've styled, preserved, or tried desperately to please over the years. No, the reflection staring back at you is someone raw, stripped of pretenses, someone who seems to have just stepped out of an old shell, standing exposed in front of a truth that cannot be denied. You can't go back. You can no longer be the woman you used to be. And in that unsettling silence, a realization begins to stir. Carl Jung once observed that the soul has an innate longing for wholeness, not perfection, not approval from others, but wholeness. What does that mean, really? It's about harmony, a fragile, powerful balance between the version of ourselves that faces the world and the one buried deep within. But to arrive at that wholeness, there is one unavoidable stage, a stage most people fear. The breaking point. That is the moment when everything you've been pretending to be begins to crumble. The polite smiles you wore like armor, the empty phrases, "It's okay, I understand," offered while your heart splintered quietly inside. The self you presented to keep others at ease suddenly feels too heavy, too fake to carry any longer. You realize something painful yet freeing. You no longer have the will to perform. You no longer wish to cushion others' comfort at the expense of your own truth. You stop trying to be agreeable, charming, or simply enough. And in the depth of that exhaustion, something new is born. Not a performance, not a mask, but a path. A path that doesn't lead toward becoming the woman the world wants, but toward becoming the woman you choose to be. That Jung called the process of individuation. This isn't some grand transformation with applause or recognition. It happens in stillness, behind closed doors, beneath tear-soaked pillows. It's quiet, but it's real, it's firm, and it's irreversible. The first truth on this journey: stepping into your authentic self means stepping beyond the shadows of your masks. You'd be surprised how many women spend their entire lives chasing love, approval, and validation, yet never truly live as themselves. They are admired for their sacrifices, their softness, their selflessness. But buried deep inside their bones is a silent, aching sigh, one that no one else hears or sees. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And he was right. This isn't poetic fantasy. It's a seismic shift, a painful awakening that cuts through generations of conditioning and carefully crafted roles. Think of it: the obedient daughter who smiles exactly when expected, the passionate partner trained to delight, the nurturing mother who never puts herself first. These roles aren't false in and of themselves, but lived without awareness, they begin to suffocate. They harden into masks. In Jungian psychology, these inherited patterns are called archetypes, universal images lodged in the collective unconscious. The mother, the maiden, the lover, the caregiver. They are meant to guide, not imprison. But what happens when one archetype takes over? When it becomes the only identity a woman is allowed to embody? She loses herself. The self-sacrificing mother may forget she's also a dreamer, a sensual being, a creative force. The ever-pleasing, good girl may feel incapable of saying no, of speaking up, of expressing rage. And so, she fades into silence, not in the world, but within her own skin. And perhaps the clearest signal that a woman has lost her way is this: the quiet daily battle between how she appears and what she truly feels. Even women who are celebrated, admired, or envied may find themselves curled up in solitude, haunted by a strange emptiness. Why? Because what they are living is not their truth, it is their persona. The social mask Jung described is not simply a disguise, it's the carefully constructed adaptation each individual assumes in order to function within the expectations of society. It is the polished version of ourselves we wear to be accepted, to fit in, to feel safe. Behind that mask lies something deeper, something ancient. The collective unconscious and its guiding forces, the archetypes. First described in 1959, these concepts became cornerstones of Jungian psychology. The persona, our social face, may help us navigate the outer world, but there is a danger in clinging too tightly to it. Over time, we begin to forget the true face beneath, and when that forgetting goes on for too long, a reckoning begins. One day, without warning, the shadow rises. According to Jung, the shadow is made up of the hidden, rejected, and often feared elements of the psyche, the parts of us we've deemed unacceptable. It is where our repressed anger hides, where envy lingers unspoken, where condemned sensuality curls into silence, and where the untamed wilderness of the soul waits unseen. For women, this shadow is often especially burdened. Society has labeled their deepest emotions as too much, their ambition as too strong, their feelings as too emotional, their independence as too threatening. To be accepted, to be loved, many women learn early on to bury these traits, locking them away in silence. But what happens when you bury something alive? Eventually it pushes back. Sometimes the shadow doesn't knock politely. It erupts through a quiet but unshakable depression, through growing tension inside a seemingly perfect relationship, or through a breakdown that comes not after failure, but after a dazzling success. The world applauds, yet inside, something cracks. Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When ignored, the shadow doesn't disappear. It only grows more powerful, operating silently, yet shaping everything. "They'll open your head," the Count said, the ring of shades on his. The real transformation begins the moment a woman stops fearing this darkness and dares to face it. She begins to speak to her shadow instead of fleeing from it. She learns to feel her anger without apology, to embrace her desires without guilt. She learns that saying no is not betrayal, and that walking away from roles she once considered sacred is not failure but freedom. This psychological awakening is not gentle. There are days when she feels utterly unrecognizable to herself, not the woman she once was, and not yet the woman she is becoming. This in-between is raw and confusing. Relationships begin to shift. Long-held beliefs crumble. The inner landscape becomes a construction site, messy and full of chaos. But amid the rubble, something new begins to stir. A pulse, a breath, a woman being born again. Because the truth is, the darkness is not here to destroy, it is here to guide. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." It is in the places we avoid, the feelings of inadequacy, the wounds of rejection, the overwhelming too-muchness, that the doorway to wholeness waits. And here's the miracle. When a woman accepts her shadow, she doesn't shrink. She expands. She grows deeper, more grounded, more radiant, in a way that can't be taught or imitated. I remember a woman once shared her story with me. On the outside, she was the perfect wife, gracious, composed, always putting others first. But after a sudden and painful divorce, her entire identity unraveled. She entered therapy and was forced to confront a truth she had long avoided. She had never truly lived for herself. Her healing was not glamorous. She journaled in silence. She wandered alone in the forest. She picked up a paintbrush, let herself scream, let herself sob. And finally, she whispered, "I don't know who this woman is, but she feels more alive than ever." That, right there, was her true self, long buried under expectations and fear, now finally rising, layer by courageous layer. When a woman releases the masks and emerges beyond the grip of her shadow, she doesn't morph into some polished version of perfection. She doesn't become someone others want her to be. She becomes herself, raw, unpredictable, wonderfully imperfect, and that authenticity emits a quiet power. a magnetic presence that cannot be explained. It can only be felt, not because she is flawless, but because she is truthful down to her bone. In the modern world where images are filtered, emotions are measured, and women are constantly told how to look, act, and feel, this kind of transformation is radical. Choosing to face the shadow, to tear away the mask, and to step fully into one's truth is no small act. It is a revolution. A woman who walks bravely into her own darkness to reclaim her light is not just changing herself. She is shifting the world around her in invisible but undeniable ways. And perhaps that is the kind of woman everyone wants to be near, not because she tries to be loved, but because she has chosen to love the truth of who she is. Number 2, the awakening moment from suffering to rebirth. And then when the masks have fallen, when the shadow is no longer avoided but looked straight in the eye, the woman crosses a new threshold, not one of peace, but of the ruins of the old self, slowly collapsing. This is the phase Jung never sugarcoated, because the process of individuation, the journey to becoming one's true self, does not begin in comfort. It begins in crisis, raw, unfiltered, often painful crisis, the kind that strips away your outer world and forces you to look inward. The real question is, have you ever experienced a fall so deep, so sudden, that it forced you to meet yourself again? For many women, true rebirth doesn't begin with joy. It begins with a rupture, a psychological earthquake that feels as if it might shatter every piece of who they thought they were. It could be an unexpected divorce that pulls the ground from under her, or a cold, emotionless goodbye after years of effort, leaving her stunned and hollow. It may be betrayal from someone she trusted, or perhaps it is quieter. A morning when she wakes up, stares at the ceiling, and cannot find a single reason to rise. The roles she once played so well, the dutiful wife, the nurturing mother, the tireless achiever, suddenly lose their meaning. What once defined her now feels strangely empty, like a beautiful vase that's quietly cracked from the inside out. In that moment, when everything external collapses, the deepest part of the self begins to whisper. And for the first time, you might actually listen. Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self that the individual who wishes to have an answer to the problem of evil has need first and foremost of self-knowledge. In the very places we fear, darkness, pain, uncertainty, lies the unexpected chance to meet ourselves. Have you ever sat in a silent room, so still, so forgotten by the outside world that you began to hear something from within? You thought you were simply lonely, but maybe, just maybe, you were finally in the presence of someone you had neglected for far too long. Yourself. This, in Jung's view, is the beginning of inner alchemy, not a denial of pain, not a distraction from suffering, but the transformation of pain into self-awareness. Just as classical alchemy sought to turn lead into gold, psychological alchemy turns collapse into clarity, wounds into wisdom, and silence into the birth of a new voice. A woman once shared a letter with our program. She said she had lived a picture-perfect life. A caring husband, healthy children, a respectable job, and the admiration of her extended family. But one day when everyone had left the house and the breakfast table stood still, she sat down and unexpectedly broke into tears. There was no specific trigger, just an overwhelming emptiness that clung to her chest and made her tremble uncontrollably. What followed was not just sadness, but a deep depression. But instead of immediately medicating it or rushing back to normal, she paused. She began to write. Pages and pages of feelings she had buried, dreams she had silenced, and memories of the countless times she said yes, when every part of her wanted to scream no. In her search for understanding, she stumbled upon a line in Jung's psychological aspects of the personality that stopped her in her tracks. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. She cried again, not from despair, but from recognition. For the first time, her pain was allowed to exist without being dismissed. If you're reading this and your chest tightens, if you're going through something painful and asking why me, then perhaps this is not your breaking point. Perhaps this is your becoming. According to Jung, the soul does not stay asleep forever. It may slumber for years beneath the weight of duty and approval, but eventually it will rise. And often, it chooses pain as its awakening touch. What's profound is that Jung never suggested we simply move on or slap on a smile to get through it. He believed that true transformation only occurs when we are willing to stay with ourselves, through the confusion, through the ruins, through the discomfort. Because as he once said in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And yet, it is also the most liberating. To meet yourself at your lowest, to sit with your shattered self in silence, that is not defeat. That is the gateway to something far more powerful. That is where inner strength is born. An awakened woman is not someone who has never been broken. She is someone who knows what it means to fall. She has lain curled up in the dark, with no one calling, no one checking in. She has whispered for help and received nothing but silence in return. She has poured herself into others until she disappeared entirely. But in those quiet, invisible nights, she begins again. And her rebirth does not come from rage, nor from revenge. It comes from something deeper, a steady, almost sacred promise. From now on, I will not abandon myself again. Can you remember a time when you thought you had truly hit bottom, but somehow, against all odds, you rose? That was no accident. That was the sacred alchemy Jung described. Not a fantasy of transformation, but a raw and authentic process that begins not with illusion or denial, but with one simple and profound act: accepting what is true. In darkness, in loneliness, in those blurred hours of confusion, the soul begins to whisper what it has long been waiting to say: I am mine. Isn't it strange how the world often idolizes a woman who appears unshaken? One who never breaks down, never cries, never falters. But Jung understood something far deeper. The most powerful presence in any room is not the woman who has never crumbled, but the one who has. The one who has dared to sit in silence with her own pain and emerge changed. These women speak not through words, but through presence. They carry a vibration, an energy of healing that cannot be faked. No need to impress, no need to explain. Their very being radiates depth because they have melted in life's fires and reformed themselves from the inside out. And as Jung so wisely wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. It is not love from others that defines your journey. The greatest gift of all is becoming yourself. So if you find yourself now in the uncertain gray zone where your old life has collapsed and the new one hasn't yet revealed itself, don't panic. Don't run. Stay. Sit with it. Feel everything. Write it down. Scream if you must. You are not falling apart. You are forging something sacred. Like a master alchemist at her furnace, you are forging your true essence, drop by drop, tear by tear. And in that blazing red fire, something extraordinary begins. A woman is being born. Not from ideals, not from what others expect, but from ashes. From the broken pieces of who she used to be. You may not see it clearly yet. You may still feel lost. But something inside you is shifting. This isn't your end. This is the beginning of your miracle. Number 3, the rise of the integrated woman, the archetype of the whole feminine. After the storm has passed, when the smoke has barely cleared and the ashes still smolder in her chest, something unexpected begins to unfold. This woman, the one who has known the darkness, no longer waits for a savior. She no longer begs to be pulled out of the abyss. She no longer writes desperate messages to hold on to people who've let her go. Instead, she begins something once unthinkable. She stays with herself. It's not a dramatic moment, not a grand declaration. It's a subtle, yet earth-shaking shift, a turning inward, a quiet strength rising from deep within. Her soul no longer pleads. It speaks, firm and steady, in its own voice. Have you ever woken up and felt, just for a moment, that you no longer care what others expect? That all you truly want is to honor your own heart? That's when it happens. That's the moment the woman begins to rise from within. Not to be admired, not to be adored, but to be true to herself. Jung described this as the transition from the persona, the social self we show the world, to the self, the inner center of the soul. And when a woman strips away the illusions and finally returns to her core, she becomes more than a role. She becomes a sovereign being. She no longer needs outside approval to feel worthy. She does not need to be loved, because she has become love. A woman like this does not chase strength. She doesn't force it. It flows from her naturally. She speaks only when it matters. She remains silent when words are hollow. She can be soft without surrendering her power. She can be strong without ever becoming harsh, because within her lies a rare peace, one born of having made peace with both her light and her shadow. No longer split in two, no longer fighting herself. In Jung's view, she has reached a state of psychic integration, a sacred union within the soul, and from that union radiates a magnetism that no one can quite explain, yet everyone feels. She doesn't announce her strength, she embodies it. To truly understand this transformation, Jung's concepts of anima and animus become essential. He believed every human soul holds an inner opposite. The masculine carries the anima, the feminine within, and the feminine carries the animus, the masculine within. When a woman hasn't yet matured her animus, she may unconsciously seek men to fill the roles she hasn't integrated herself. Direction, strength, logic, authority. She might repeatedly find herself in unequal relationships, looking for a savior, a guide, or someone to validate her worth. But when the animus is awakened and brought into balance, that changes entirely. She no longer looks for a father or a hero. She no longer needs rescue. She seeks an equal. In Ion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, Jung wrote, "The animus corresponds to the paternal logos, just as the anima corresponds to the maternal eros." This means that when a woman develops her animus, she doesn't just connect to reason and structure. She also learns to trust her own thoughts, to make firm decisions, and to design a life that belongs to her. She no longer depends on someone else to navigate her emotional tides. She no longer runs from sadness or spirals in fear. She stands in her feelings, grounded, not to react but to respond from clarity. I once met a woman like this. She had spent years in a marriage where she had to shrink herself to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But one day she made a decision, not out of hatred, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. She chose to leave, not because her husband was unworthy, but because she no longer wanted to betray herself. When I asked what gave her the strength, she simply said, "I've been with myself long enough to no longer want to abandon myself." That is the sign of a mature animus. Not loud, not combative, just a clarity so profound that no one can shake it, no matter how much noise surrounds her. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard, nor does she seek approval to validate her truth. If you're on this journey, you may feel that everything around you is changing, subtly at first, but then all at once, like waking up from a long collective dream. People who once felt close may now feel distant, as if speaking a different emotional language. Relationships that once seemed vital may begin to feel shallow, like echoes of a former life. But don't panic. It doesn't mean you're wrong or that you've outgrown love. It simply means your frequency is shifting. And when a woman begins to live in truth, anything not rooted in that same truth will naturally fall away, like leaves in autumn, letting go because they must. The most beautiful part is this. Such a woman is not captivating because of her looks or clever words. Her allure runs deeper than appearances. She moves people with her presence, an invisible force that stirs something ancient in others. In every glance, step, and silence, she carries a grounded strength, the kind that only someone who has walked through the depths and chosen to rise again can possess, and that is something no one can imitate. Truth doesn't need to shout. It radiates quietly in the way you hold space for yourself, and from that inner stability, extend that same sanctuary to others. It's not about perfection, it's about presence. The kind that lingers long after you've left the room. Jung once said, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries, psychological aspects of the personality. A whole woman isn't someone who has erased her weaknesses or suppressed her inconvenient feelings. No, she is someone who has learned to stand with both her tenderness and her ferocity, her longing and her peace. She doesn't split herself into socially acceptable fragments. She brings it all. And because of that, she no longer lives to be chosen. She lives because she has chosen herself. Isn't that the most radical act of self-respect? Do you feel something shifting inside you, even if you can't yet name it? Perhaps it's subtle, but unmistakable. Maybe you've stopped trying to please everyone. Maybe you no longer wait for permission to take up space, to breathe, to be seen. If so, know that the whole woman within you is rising, not from perfection, but from a place of deep, radical honesty. Not to be loved, but because she has chosen to love herself, and perhaps that is the kind of woman everyone truly longs to be near, not because she needs them, but because she is fully herself. And somehow, in her presence, others are reminded of who they could become too. Number 4. The power of refusal and true magnetism. Why is she desired by everyone? Not all light is blinding. Some lights are soft but magnetic. Some women walk into a room wearing no glamorous outfit, speaking no loud words, making no effort to be noticed, yet all eyes turn to them. Why? She does nothing dramatic, yet her presence subtly shifts the atmosphere. It's as though the room itself takes a breath when she enters. There is a quiet, unshakable energy that radiates from her, a magnetism no one can quite explain but everyone feels. Look closely and you'll see what it is, the power of truth. She is not the most traditionally beautiful in the room, nor the most agreeable or easy to impress. She doesn't strive to be liked, and she certainly doesn't beg for approval. That is what sets her apart. Jung never said a woman should abandon her instinct to be loved. Instead, he warned us, when we place being loved above being real, we inevitably lose ourselves. A whole woman doesn't need to be liked to feel worthy. Her worth isn't up for debate. As Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, the most important question anyone can ask is, what myth am I living? And this woman? She's not living someone else's myth. She's living the story her own soul is writing, one truthful step at a time. Have you ever met a woman who doesn't apologize for her emotions? She doesn't hide her tears, doesn't downplay her joy or her sorrow. She doesn't shrink when her voice trembles with feeling, nor does she fear when her gaze turns cold, if that's what truth requires. That's a sign of integration. She's not performing strength. She is strong, shaped by experience. She's been to hell and back, not as a metaphor, but through real-life trials that tore her open and stitched her back together. She doesn't pretend to be fine. She's been broken. She's been reborn, and now the very cracks in her soul are where the light enters. As Carl Jung once said, only the wounded physician heals. Collected Works, Volume 10. It's the one who has carried their own wounds that truly knows how to hold space for others. The whole woman is living proof of that. She doesn't use her strength to dominate. She uses her lived experience to create safety. She doesn't compete. She doesn't need to be better than anyone. She doesn't chase victory or seek validation. And when she refuses, it's not out of defiance. It's because she values her energy. She knows how to say no without guilt. She sets boundaries that honor her peace. She doesn't trade her well-being just to keep others comfortable. She no longer silences her intuition to avoid tension. And perhaps most powerfully of all, she no longer apologizes for her depth. She doesn't say, "I know I think too much," or "Sorry if I made you uncomfortable because I'm sensitive." Those words were once her tickets to belonging, to love. But now she understands her depth is not a flaw, it is a gift. For so long she may have seen it as a burden. Too much, too intense, too inconvenient. But in truth, That very depth is what makes her radiant. Real attraction doesn't come from shrinking to fit neatly into someone's fleeting preferences. When a woman becomes the guardian of her own boundaries, calm, clear, and consistent, the universe itself begins to rearrange around her new frequency. No longer does she bend for approval. No longer does she tolerate energy that drains her. Those who once took advantage of her softness suddenly find themselves shut out, gently but firmly. The doors they used to walk through are now closed, and she holds the key. Relationships that were once held together by her need to please begin to dissolve, not out of bitterness, but because they were never built on truth. But in that space of loss, something powerful begins to unfold. She starts attracting souls who have also walked their own path of fire. Those who carry depth, who honor truth, who show up fully and without masks. If you are learning to say no, if your hands still tremble when you set a boundary, then take heart. You are drawing closer to your true self, and in doing so, you are becoming dangerous in the most beautiful and sacred way. Dangerous to systems that once demanded your smallness, to the relationships that required your silence to survive. Dangerous to any form of love that demanded your permission to simply be. And above all, you are becoming irresistibly magnetic in a way no one can fake or fabricate. Carl Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Real clarity doesn't come from being seen by others. It comes from daring to see yourself and not flinching. The woman who is quietly desired by all is not chasing anyone's gaze. She has chosen to turn inward, to face herself fully, and to stay. That is the difference. And you, yes, you, if you are walking this path, then know this. Every time you say no and truly mean it, every time you stop apologizing for emotions that are valid and real, every time you catch yourself people-pleasing and choose differently, you are becoming that woman. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will like it. But that's not your mission. Your energy, aligned and whole, will speak volumes to those who are meant to feel it. And when you finally become honest with yourself, the kind of magnetism you radiate will never need explanation. It will simply be felt. Number 5. Restructuring life and worldview. The magnetism of an honest woman doesn't lie only in the quiet beauty she carries. It lies in the silent yet profound shifts unfolding within her entire life. Because when a woman dares to set real boundaries, when she has the courage to walk away from what no longer aligns with her truth, the result isn't only respect, it's a complete and irreversible restructuring. Her relationships begin to change, her lifestyle adjusts, and most significantly, the belief systems she once held as absolute begin to crumble. Can you recall a time when, after speaking your truth, the entire landscape of your life started to look different? At first, that change can feel destabilizing, sometimes even painful. People once close may start to drift like clouds after a storm. Relationships that once meant the world suddenly feel shallow, unable to hold the new version of you. Friends stop calling as often. Family may look at you and say, "You've changed." And they're right, just not in the way they think. The grief is real, the loss is valid. Jung understood this deeply. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "To rest in the comfort zone of the collective opinion is to evade the call of individuation." When you begin the journey of individuation, the path of becoming your full, integrated self, you no longer belong to the collective that shaped you, because your soul begins to call you forward to a new place where truth matters more than belonging, where authenticity outweighs approval. And in that place, everything starts to shift. I remember a guest once shared on the show that after leaving a 12-year relationship, she felt as though she had stepped into an empty desert. It wasn't just the loss of her partner. She also drifted from mutual friends, from her in-laws, and from the daily rituals that once gave structure to her identity. Her whole world had changed. But in that silence, where nothing echoed back, she began to hear something for the first time, her own voice. "I'm no longer afraid of silence," she said, "because in it I finally heard myself." And perhaps that's the great irony. When we stop clinging to what no longer fits us, what truly belongs finally begins to appear. These aren't superficial connections. They're not the kind of friendships that require performance or emotional shapeshifting. These are soul-aligned beings, people who resonate with your truth. They're women on the same sacred path of coming home to themselves. They don't compete. They don't try to fix you. They don't rush to offer cliché advice. They simply listen. They stay. They hold space. They weep with you without shame, and they celebrate when you dare to speak your raw, trembling truth aloud. Jung called this mysterious phenomenon synchronicity. The mysterious way the universe rearranges itself to match your inner frequency. It's not a metaphor. It's a quiet, observable truth for those paying attention. When you begin to transform from within, when your inner landscape starts to shift, your old worldview doesn't just fade. It starts to collapse completely. The beliefs you once clung to begin to dissolve, one by one, like fog lifting under morning light. You stop insisting that everything must be logically explained in order to be valid. Logic still has its place, but it no longer rules your world. Instead, intuition begins to sharpen. You dream more, longer, deeper, and your dreams stop feeling like chaotic fragments of nonsense. They begin to carry weight, to speak in symbols, to offer meaning. They're not just images anymore. They become messages from the soul. Jung believed dreams were the small, hidden door leading into the deepest and most sacred sanctum of the soul. In Man and His Symbols, he emphasized that dreams weren't random. They were bridges to the unconscious. A woman undergoing awakening begins to understand this truth firsthand. She realizes that true wisdom is not knowing everything. It is learning how to listen, especially to what she doesn't yet understand. She listens more closely now, to her body, to her breath, to the tension in her chest when she enters a room, or the unexpected wave of emotion that stirs when she hears a certain melody. These are not coincidences. These are messages. And from that place of inner awareness, she starts to live by an internal compass instead of an external schedule. Her life is no longer dictated by the ticking of the clock or the expectations of others. As she ventures further inward, she begins to recognize the archetypes moving within her. When she feels alive with creativity, pulsing with passion, and grounded in her senses, the lover archetype may be awakening within her. When she feels a tender longing to care for others, to nurture and offer comfort, the mother begins to speak. When she craves solitude, stillness, and deep contemplation, choosing silence over noise, the wise woman is surely guiding her path. These archetypes are no longer rigid roles she must force herself into. Instead, they become a living language, a way to understand herself more deeply, a map to navigate the complexity of her inner world. Do you ever feel like explaining yourself has become exhausting? Do you sense that your need to justify your transformation is slowly fading? If so, you're very close to the heart of real change, and that is a sacred place to be. Don't be afraid if old connections no longer seem to recognize you. Don't panic if the places you once found comforting now feel strangely unfamiliar. That restless boredom you feel with what once excited you, it's not something to fix. It's a sign that you are stepping into something more authentic. Jung once said, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." True change doesn't come from forcing yourself to become someone new. It begins with a quiet, radical act of accepting that you have already changed. And from that acceptance, everything around you begins to restructure, not around the demands of others, but around the truth rising inside you. A woman who begins to restructure her life doesn't always start with grand declarations or perfect plans. She begins with small, quiet shifts. She says yes to what feels right. She rearranges her living space, not for aesthetics, but to reflect her inner clarity. She steps outside alone in the early morning, listens to the birds' song, and breathes with purpose. She writes down her dreams, even the strange ones, and welcomes what they might be trying to show her. She accepts that she is no longer who she used to be, and most importantly, she lets go of the exhausting hope that others will fully understand her evolution. This kind of restructuring doesn't come like an earthquake. It's more like a soft, continuous wind, subtle, steady, and irreversible. And that is how she steps into her real life. She no longer borrows beliefs. She no longer inhabits someone else's dream. Every step, whether uncertain, quiet, or alone, is a step into a new world where she is fully herself, no longer seeking permission to exist. Number 6. Integrating the inner archetypes. The lover, the mother, the magician, the maiden, each one lives within her. And when a woman finally begins to walk to the rhythm of her own steps, no longer chasing the applause or approval of others, she enters a deeper layer of her journey. It's no longer just about leaving the past behind. It becomes about embracing the full complexity of her being. She is no longer trying to shed all the roles she once played. Now, she is weaving them together. It's no longer fragmentation. It's a symphony. She consciously chooses to live as a whole expression where every voice inside her is acknowledged, respected, and allowed to exist without needing to dominate the others. Jung called this essential to the process of individuation, the integration of the inner archetypes. Yet many women, not through fault of their own but through conditioning, fall into the trap of believing they must choose one identity and live within it. A good mother, a sweet lover, a devoted wife, a quiet daughter. They pick the role most easily accepted, most readily loved, and abandon the rest. But these archetypes aren't cages. They are not boxes to lock oneself into. They are living energies, fluid, dynamic, and alive. They move within us, offering wisdom, power, and guidance at different times. Within every woman lives multiple archetypes. She might be the lover, sensual, passionate, drawn to beauty and pleasure, unafraid to seek joy. She might also be the mother, nurturing, patient, filled with compassion, a sanctuary for those she loves. The magician or wise woman, deeply intuitive, drawn to solitude, and carrying within her a timeless perspective. She represents a kind of inner knowing that doesn't clamor to be understood. And then there is the maiden, free-spirited, brimming with curiosity, wildly creative and rich with wonder. These archetypes don't cancel each other out or fight for dominance. Quite the opposite. They coexist, complementing one another like different instruments in the same symphony. Each is a reflection of the same soul, expressed through a different light. I once spoke with a woman in her 50s, a former CEO of a major tech company, who had spent decades leading with her intellect. For years, she embodied the magician and mother archetypes. She was rational, focused, perceptive, tending skillfully to both her team and her family. But then, after a severe health crisis, something within her shifted. I felt burnout, she said, not just tired, but hollow, like something essential inside me had been forgotten. So, she began to explore what felt missing. She enrolled in belly dance classes. She attended figure drawing sessions where she could be a beginner again. She started writing tender love letters to herself, something she'd never allowed before. With a twinkle in her eye and a playful laugh, she told me, "I realize there's still a playful young girl in me. That part's not dead." And she was right. It wasn't. The lover and the maiden within her weren't replacing who she had been. They were awakening to meet who she was becoming. They expanded the inner landscape she'd spent years cultivating. They added color and rhythm to a world that had become too gray, too linear. Carl Jung believed that true psychological freedom doesn't come from cutting away the parts of ourselves we don't understand or deem unnecessary. Rather, it comes from making space for every part of who we are, without shame, without conflict, without trying to fix what was never broken. True maturity doesn't mean choosing one side or role. It means reconciling the opposites within, bringing them to the same table. You can crave deep sensuality and still find comfort in silent nights reading philosophy. You can be a loving, nurturing parent and still need time where no one depends on you. You can dance freely at a party and still cry quietly to an old song in the middle of the night. And most importantly, you don't have to explain or apologize for any of it. If you've ever felt confused, even disoriented by these inner contradictions, don't worry. That confusion is a sign of awakening. It means your archetypes are stirring, sometimes all at once, calling for your attention, asking to be honored. You don't have to rush to define who you are. Instead, begin by listening. One morning you may feel an urge to create something beautiful and spontaneous. That's the lover stirring in you. Another day you may crave solitude, ancient books, and a deeper connection with your inner world. That's the magician speaking. Then there may come a day when all you want is to lie on the floor and doodle freely, no agenda. That's the maiden reclaiming her playfulness. And when someone near you is hurting, without hesitation, the mother steps in, bringing her nurturing presence. You are all of these, and more importantly, you are allowed to be all of them, sometimes in the same day. A woman who begins integrating her inner archetypes no longer asks, "Who should I be to be loved?" That question no longer holds power over her. Instead, she asks, "Which part of me needs to come alive today?" That question doesn't just bring her clarity, it opens the door to creative energy. It changes how she paints, how she writes, how she speaks, how she makes love, how she leads, and how she simply exists. She no longer strives to become the ideal woman because she sees how limiting that label truly is. She becomes something more alive, more real, a vibrant, uncontainable being, fluid, radiant, and gloriously uncaged. Jung wrote a line I return to often in memories, dreams, reflections. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. True wholeness doesn't come from slicing away the pieces we dislike or hiding what feels messy. It comes from weaving all of it, joy and sorrow, fire and stillness, into one cohesive life. And you? Yes, you. If you've read this far, I invite you to pause. Just for a moment, ask yourself, is there a part of me I've pushed aside for too long? Is there an archetype, forgotten, quiet, waiting, that's knocking on the door of my awareness, asking to return? If the answer is yes, don't be afraid to open that door. Let her in. She is not here to take something away from you. She's here to remind you who you've always been. The path to becoming a whole woman is never a straight line. It isn't a formula to follow. It's a dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes messy, between the living, breathing parts of your soul. And you, dear one, are the choreographer. You don't need permission. You don't need to be flawless. You only need to be honest and brave enough to welcome all that you are, without shame, without apology. That is true freedom. Perhaps the most beautiful and difficult part of becoming a whole woman is not learning something new, but having the courage to peel away everything that isn't you. The old layers. Be nice, be agreeable, be lovable, be selfless. They once served you. They helped you stay safe. They allowed you to belong. But now they have become a prison. And the moment you say enough, not with rage, but with unwavering clarity, is the moment you begin to become the woman you were always meant to be, not the woman someone else expected. Left dawn. You don't need to be the woman everyone desires. The truth is, the most deeply loved women are often those who never tried to be. They don't seek admiration. They don't bend themselves into someone else's ideal. She simply lives so truthfully, so fully aligned with her own essence that she cannot be ignored. Her authenticity becomes undeniable, and then, almost effortlessly, she begins to attract the right things, the right people, the right love. Not because she performs, not because she molds herself to be liked, but because she has chosen herself fully and unapologetically. There is a quiet, mysterious stillness in the eyes of a woman who knows who she is. Have you ever noticed it? When she stands in front of the mirror, she doesn't rush to adjust her appearance to match someone else's idea of beauty. She doesn't search for flaws. She simply looks and smiles. Because the reflection looking back at her is someone she once only dreamed of becoming. Not perfect, not immune to heartbreak, not endlessly strong, but real, honest, whole, and, perhaps most importantly, no longer asking for permission to exist. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That truth lives at the heart of transformation. You cannot embody your deepest, most luminous self by chasing empty affirmations or forced optimism. You must walk through the dark. You must embrace the wounds. You must face the pain you've tried to forget, the shadows you once buried deep inside. And from that confrontation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to shine, not with a borrowed glow from external praise, but with a radiant light that has been forged from within, a light that no one can dim because it was born in truth. If you are somewhere in the middle of this process, if things feel tangled, if you're uncertain, if you're questioning everything, please know you are not alone. This path isn't neat, it isn't tidy, but it is real. We're a generation of women waking up shoulder to shoulder. Together, we are laying down the old burdens, the roles we were told to play, the guilt we carried, the perfection we chased. We are choosing ourselves, and not from a place of fear or rebellion, but from a deep, grounded place of self-love. Every time you speak your truth, every time you draw a boundary, every time you silence the voice in your head that says you're not enough, you create a ripple, a small but powerful shockwave set into the collective unconscious. And somewhere, maybe in another city, maybe in another country, there is a woman who feels that ripple. She sees your courage, and it gives her permission to be brave too. Because when one woman heals, she doesn't just heal for herself. She heals for her mother, who may have never been allowed to speak her truth. She heals for her daughter, who will grow up knowing she can choose herself. She heals for all those who never had the language to describe their pain. She doesn't just open a door, she builds a new path. A path not only for herself, but for everyone who will walk behind her. Every step you take back toward your authentic self lights the way for someone else still trying to find their own footing. So even if this road feels isolating, even if you think you're not ready or strong enough, remember this: you are never walking alone. Behind you is a river of women returning home to themselves, and ahead of you is the full, unfiltered version of who you are becoming. And in this very moment, there is only one thing you must do: choose yourself. And when you do, when you make that choice, again and again, something beautiful happens. The world begins to rearrange itself, not to challenge you, but to mirror that inner commitment. You'll begin to notice opportunities that align with your truth. You'll attract relationships that nourish, not drain. You'll step into spaces where your voice isn't just tolerated, it's welcomed. You were never meant to live small. You were never meant to dim your light or shrink to fit. You were never meant to ask for permission to be yourself. You are here to live truthfully. You are here to live fully. Start now. Start with you.